Hi, I'm Steve Cook, Director of Photography for Sweet Meek Magazine, and I'm going to do a little video for you today to accompany the article I wrote in the fall 2016 issue, and we're starting at the basics. We're going with the exposure triangle. You know, over the course of learning how to be a good photographer, there's a ton of stuff you need to know. The camera settings, how your lens works, how to compose images, lighting, a lot of stuff. Right now we're just going to go all the way to the basics. We're going to talk about the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO. I'm going to bring a model out, we're going to do a shoot, I'm going to show you on screen what the different settings do, and hopefully this will help you get on your way to making some great images. Here we go. Okay, we're out here now, we have our model Shannon.
Hello.
And we are going to start with aperture. Again, aperture, shutter, and ISO affect how much they affect your exposure, but they also have other effects on your image as well. Now, aperture is the opening within the lens. The wider open it is, the more light that will hit the sensor during the time that the shutter is open. And of course, the narrower it is, the less light. But that also affects your depth of field. Now, the reason that's important is you can determine how much of your subject or things around the subject are in focus. For example, wide open aperture will get you a narrower depth of field. You can focus on just the eyes, and maybe the tip of the nose and behind her would be out of focus. Or you could stop down the aperture and include more things in focus. For example, I could get this apple and the foliage behind her in focus as well. Now, that would be important if you're shooting fashion and you want to make sure the outfit's in focus, if you're shooting the model against a car, and what have you. Basically, you determine how much is in focus by how open your aperture is. Also note that the length of your lens and the distance the subject is from you will have some determination of the depth of field as well. So the longer the lens and the closer the model, the narrower, the wider the lens, and the further away you would get a wider depth of field. Okay. So this is an f1.8 lens, and you can see we have it open all the way to 1.8, and what's behind her is quite out of focus, and she's very in focus. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close it down a little bit, and you'll see the further I close that down, the more and more is in focus. Now, since I'm in aperture priority mode, you notice that the shutter also slowed down to allow more light in. So if I were to actually take a photo here, since I'm holding it, you're going to see a little bit of a motion blur. So if we were to go that slow, we'd use a tripod, and we'll talk more about that in the shutter section. Again, more wide open, smaller depth of field, more closed, more in focus. Okay, so next is shutter. I've gone to shutter priority mode here, so you're going to see the aperture adjust on its own. Again, normally we'd shoot manual and set those exposures on our own. Right now the camera is going to guess at what it thinks the best exposure is. I always want to maintain that. But anyway, the faster the shutter, the less light that hits the sensor. The slower the shutter, the more light. But it controls the motion. So if you have anything moving and you want to freeze it, you'll use a faster shutter. If you want to show the motion, you'll use a slower shutter. Also note, you'll want to use a tripod if you're shooting any slower than the length of your camera or the length of your lens. For example, this is an 85 millimeter. If I'm shooting at less than 1/80th of a second, I'll want to put it on a tripod. Otherwise, I'll introduce blur just by holding it and not holding it steady. Okay, so I'm going to go and shoot her at a faster speed. And go ahead and shake your hair around, Shannon. Okay, so that's 1/640th, and she's not completely frozen, but she's relatively frozen. I'm not going to go faster than that out here because the images will be too dark. I'm going to slow it down to 1/30th. Go ahead and shake your head around again, and you can see we have way more motion. So basically, shutter, as well as being part of the exposure triangle, controls the motion in your image. And finally, we have ISO. So what I've done here is I've gone back into manual mode, and I've stopped the shutter or the aperture down to f11, and I'm at 1/320th of a second. Now you can see it's quite dark. if I bring the ISO up, it increases the sensitivity of the sensor. At the same time, what it affects is noise. Now you may not see too much here. This is a newer camera, but each camera is a little different. The higher you go, the more and more noise that will start to appear, and you'll also start to lose some of the color. It'll appear more and more black and white as you crank that up. And the reason you would adjust the ISO is in the case where you're not getting enough light due to environmental reasons, or you need your aperture stopped down to get a lot of things in focus, or you can't slow your shutter down any further because you'd introduce a lot of motion blur. Basically, it's a last-ditch effort to try to make the image usable. Basically, try to always shoot at the base ISO of the camera, which is usually 100, 200. That will get you the cleanest images, and only crank it up when your shutter settings or your aperture settings won't allow you to get enough light in. That's basically it. Thanks for watching.
I hope you found this basic demonstration helpful. If so, please give me a like, as well as subscribe. I'll be doing a lot more of these videos, as well as videos of model shoots. Also, if you would, please head on over to Instagram and follow me at SteveCookPhoto, as well as Sweet Inked Magazine at Sweet Inked Magazine. Thanks, and see you soon.